Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Nick Black, son of Sir John Black. A recent BBC4 programme featured Coventry as a car manufacturing centre, and Sir John, who was a leading light with his involvement with Standard Triumph and Ferguson tractors. Nick has written a biography of his father entitled Triumph and Tragedy. Nick, good to see you. Thank you so much for sparing me some time.
Yeah, nice to see you. I have actually still got this thing in the middle of the screen saying this meeting is being recorded.
Yeah,
and I can't get rid of it. So I mean, I can see you in a small box, but
don't worry, I can see you, and what I'm seeing here is okay. So don't worry, you're coming over in splendid Panavision or whatever you want to call it. So there we are.
Okay, so, all right. I can see you. Yeah.
Let's have a chat about your father, Sir John Black. He was born in 1895. Kingston upon Thames. Father was a civil servant. He was one of 6 siblings. Big family.
Yeah, they definitely were. It was a sort of post-Victorian time, really, 1895. And he had 2 sisters. They were a very artistic family. One of his sisters, Nora, was quite a renowned painter, actually. She was a very good artist. And his grandfather, my father's grandfather, was a wallpaper designer in France, in Paris. So he came from quite an artistic background, which is quite surprising in a way.
Yeah. And his father actually worked at Kew, didn't he, in the Public Records Office? Is that correct?
I don't know if the Public Records Office was there, but I don't know if it was at Kew in those days. But he was, he worked in the Records Office. Yeah, he did. He was a public clerk or something along those lines.
Yeah. So your father, Sir John, was educated at St Paul's in London, and later on he studied law at the London University. Did he actually practice at all, or did the war come along?
He was, well, just before the First World War, he was actually articled to a solicitor's office. He was something like an articled clerk. I think that was what they were called. So he was only about 16 or 17, and he got this job with a solicitor's office. And in fact, he was working for a patent agency as well at one point. So he seemed to cram an awful lot in. I think he left quite early from school, must have gone to university, London University or whatever it was, for like a short period of time, maybe 2 years. And then by the time he was 18, well, he was 19 actually, in 1914, he actually volunteered for the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserves. So he'd packed quite a lot in. He did. So he was, in fact, pursuing a legal career, which I think was his father's choice.
Yeah. Because interestingly enough, the job with the patents agency put him in touch with Morgan Cars, I believe.
Yes, it did.
And that was the big connection to the motor industry that sort of manifested itself after World War One.
Yeah, and completely inadvertently, because I think he was just working in an office for Popplewell. I think it was Stanley Popplewell and Sons. I think their names were this patent agency. I mean, he would have had no idea that in his future he'd be involved in motor cars. He wouldn't have any idea at that stage. That just came out of the blue, really, through a chance meeting after the First World War, when he met somebody who was involved with Hillman's.
Tell us a little bit more about his World War I service.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, he went to Gallipoli. He didn't actually fight, but the ship that he was on landed on the peninsula. They all got off. The whole gang of them got off, did this march along the peninsula. The whole operation was abandoned because by the time that they were there, which I think was 1916, would have been 1915, the operation was aborted because they knew that they'd lost so many people in Gallipoli. It wasn't worth throwing more soldiers or sailors in. So what happened was they got back onto the ship. They were ordered to return. They then went to the Greek island of Mudros. Many of the sailors had got dysentery, and they were there on this island of Mudros recuperating for some time before coming back to England. So that was his rather short visit to Gallipoli, but
Yeah.
it's still a strategic moment in history.
Very much so. And of course, it was possibly one of the situations where dear old Winston Churchill slightly got it wrong. And
Well said.
yeah.
True, isn't it? That's
But
true, yeah.
but having said that, reading a Churchill biography recently, Clement Attlee was one of the last to leave the peninsula. And
I didn't know.
yeah, and he said, as far as he was concerned, he didn't feel that Churchill had let anyone down. It was just, unfortunate, but there we are. Now, your father joined the Heavy Machine Gun Brigade.
Heavy branch, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it happened or whether the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve did kind of morph into this, but the Machine Gun Corps, I think a lot of people did join the Machine Gun Corps for some reason in the First World War who'd been in the RN, the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve before. So he was a first-class machine gunner, apparently, my dad. And there's that lovely photo of him in a trench in 1917 in France, at the back of a trench with this whopping great machine gun that he's cleaning or something. So he was part of the Heavy Branch, and he the Machine Gun Corps that transformed into the Tank Regiment, the first Tank Regiment.
Right.
So that definitely did develop in it. The Machine Gun Corps, they used tanks anyway.
Yeah.
So they naturally moved into the Royal Tank Regiment, and it was the first. He was in the first Tank Regiment.
So that was an interesting situation, and he was made a captain at the tender age of 23, which is incredible.
Yeah, he was. He was.
Yeah.
And the fellow, there's some extraordinary connections with the Tank Regiment, because the fellow that he met on the train, who introduced him to William Hillman, and resulting in him marrying one of Hillman's daughters, Daisy Hillman, was Thomas Sidney Dick, whose nephew, Alec Dick, took over Standard Triumph after my dad. But also Thomas Sidney Dick was a major in the first Tank Corps, and he used to walk in front of the tanks in the middle of war. He used to lead his tanks walking in front of them. Literally.
I'm losing you a little bit picture-wise. You're sort of going quite a bit to your right, I think. That's better.
Sorry.
Don't worry about that. And also getting quite a few hands getting into it.
Yeah, I'd just love to get rid of this little sign in the middle about this meeting is being recorded.
Don't worry. You're fine.
Get rid of that. Yeah, okay. Right.
Let's talk about after the war, because as you said already, he did join Hillman Cars. At that time, I suppose Hillman were around, Ford, Morris, Austin, Standard.
Yeah.
They were all doing their own thing, and obviously consolidation came later. But I suppose it was quite good from his point of view to marry one of the Hillman daughters, Margaret, and he married her in 1921.
Correct. And I think he joined, I mean, when you look at some of the historical details about his career, they often say he joined Hillman's in 1919.
Right.
The story goes that this Thomas Sidney Dick said, not only can I get you a job with a good company, Hillman, because I've married one of the daughters, but I could introduce you to one of the daughters who is of a marriageable age. So it seemed like a whole package.
Car auction.
Yes, exactly. Car auction. Oh God.
Now,
he did. He married her in 1921, Margaret Verena Hillman.
Right, and they had a daughter, Rosalind, who was born in 1922. Yes. And you're the product of the second marriage, but I believe you had a bit of a job to try and trace Rosalind, did you?
Oh my goodness, it was amazing. And it was Spencer Wilkes's son, Nicholas Wilkes, who initially put me in touch, because Rosalind was his cousin.
Oh, right.
So Spencer Wilkes of Rover married a Hillman daughter. Hillman had 6 daughters, and 3 of them were in the motor trade. It was all very, very much in family in Coventry at the time.
Yeah.
So Spencer Wilkes of Rover, I've been in touch with his son Nicholas, who died only 6 months ago. And he said to me, I never met Rosalind, but I met her daughter, and I never knew that my half sister had any children, but she had a son and a daughter, Jimmy and Dawn. So we found that one out. And it was Michael Dick, whose father, Alec Dick, took over on Standard Triumph from my dad. He was my dad's sort of right-hand man, second in command, assistant managing director of Standard. It was Michael Dick who told me from that his mother remembered Rosalind died in an accident through falling down the stairs. And that was at her mother, Daisy Hillman's house in Paynton, Devon. So I eventually found that there were these points of contact. So I literally looked in the telephone directory. I was told that Rosalind married somebody called William Barnett. And I looked in Devon under Barnett, and sure enough, there was a Rosalind Dawn Barnett, who was Rosalind's daughter, and a Jimmy Barnett or James Barnett. So I phoned them up, and then that was just an absolute revelation. We met Jimmy down in Devon on Dartmoor, and he showed me his mother's photo album, Rosalind's photo album, with pictures of her mum, and it was like another part of the jigsaw puzzle when I discovered.
Yeah.
But
and
ironically,
keep
I was living in Devon.
Yeah.
But near Wellington, between Taunton and Exeter, in the early 70s, when Rosalind was running a country park at Bag Park Manor on Dartmoor, where they were training racehorses, and in Devon, and I was actually living in Devon. I never knew where she lived. I'd never met her in my life. My father never even mentioned her. My mum told me a couple of things, and that was it.
Yeah.
But it was the whole thing was just bizarre.
Surreal. Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So and her son, Jimmy, looks more like my dad than I do. Jimmy Barnett, and he's my dad's grandson, but only a year older than me. But anyway. So it's all crazy stuff.
So the Hillman dynasty changes, doesn't it, when the Roots brothers come out, take it over?
Yes.
And Sir John becomes general manager of
at Standard. Yeah.
At Standard at that point. Yeah. Now, some very interesting production figures, because when he got in as managing director, that was in 1934. They were knocking out 7,000 a year cars in 1930. By 1939, just before the war, that's gone up 50,000, 50.
57,000.
Yeah,
I know.
It's incredible, isn't
phenomenal.
it?
Yeah. Phenomenal. And because he kind of almost invented the mass production technique that Ford had promoted in America. So my dad was one of the first that got the sort of mass production going, the conveyor belts going in the factories in Coventry. And I mean, they were employing thousands. They were up to, in their peak, it was well over 10,000 people were working there. And they did. They were really, I think before the war, especially the Flying Standard range, they were really pushing out some vehicles. It was a pity that the war got in the way, because they were really on a roll just before the war. 1939 was absolutely a heyday for them.
Would you say your father's beginnings in Kingston were middle class, I guess, weren't they? I suppose.
It's all a little bit. It's all a bit of a contradiction, my dad's life, because I've found out his great grandfather came from Ireland, from Dublin, and moved to Liverpool, we think. And the family were in Lancashire, and I'm wondering whether there's a connection with the potato famine, or so his roots were pretty humble. Yeah. But they were described as a sort of middle class artistic family. They'd moved down to work for a records office. I think my dad's mum might have even run a corner shop, because where they lived in King's Road in Kingston on Thames, it looks like a corner shop. It's actually, ironically, an off license now, significantly, but it looks like a corner shop. So, like you say, with about 5 or 6 siblings, they were quite a big family. Yeah. And in 1914, they moved to Kingston Hill, to a Victorian villa in Kingston Hill, which was a sort of upmarket type of place. Lovely, quite a nice big, attached villa in a big terrace. So they in 1914 they'd moved there. So I mean, 2 of his brothers were killed in the First World War, and then so I suppose a couple of them would have left. A few of them would have left home by then.
Now,
But yes, humble beginnings, really.
It's don't take this the wrong way, but the lifestyle was quite like a playboy up to a point, wasn't it? Hunting, shooting, sailing, golfing, skiing with Montgomery, tennis with Maskell and Perry. He was very
Fred
well
Perry.
connected. Yeah.
You know, a couple of the articles that were done on the documentary, the BBC4 documentary, used that word playboy, and it seems too modern to me.
Yes.
Because in the 1930s, that word, I don't know if that word had been invented. I suppose Noel Coward was around, but maybe that had been invented, but it doesn't have the same connotation now. And I think my dad had a lot of style. He loved skiing. He was a member of the Kandahar Ski Club in Mürren, Switzerland since 1929, and right up until the early 50s when in 1949 there's an iconic photograph of him with Montgomery, and my dad was a particularly good skier. He was good. He had a Kandahar Gold K badge, so he was a very keen skier. There's a big saga which I've been trying to find out. What was he doing skiing in 1943 in Switzerland? and you won't believe this. I've been in touch with the tourist board in Switzerland, and one of the historians has maintained that the Kandahar Ski Club was still operating during the war. They weren't having races, but the English people were still skiing out there. And special trains were laid on from England across occupied France to visit relatives in Switzerland.
Heavens.
It's just the people won't accept it. I'm still trying to find out. I've been in touch with the National Archives, but there were special trains with red crosses on the roof and on the sides. And I'm wondering if they possibly got a lift with them.
Yes, could be.
Because otherwise they would have been obliterated. The Germans would have just potted them off as they went along, isn't it?
The fact you were heading through neutral country didn't come into it, did it?
No, going through occupied France. But anyway, I'm still trying to work out that one.
So that you're going to tell us more about that in a few years' time. Now,
hopefully,
like most entrepreneurs, he made money and he lost money, and I suppose selling the standard engine manufacturing capability to Jaguar wasn't one of his finest days.
No, it was. I'm pretty certain this was a 6-cylinder engine. It was a really powerful machine. But I've worked out since that, you see, what it was, he was under contract with SS Jaguar. He was under contract with William Lyons. Mm-hmm. And that contract restricted him from supplying these 6-cylinder engines to other companies. And he was actually supplying chassis, engines to all kinds of companies in Coventry. There were loads of them. Alvis and all sorts of people he was supplying chassis for, engines to Morgan. I can't even remember half the names of these companies. But he was supplying these chassis. I think William Lyons was restricting him in the contract. And there was also Avon Bodies Limited, the Avon Bodies of somewhere. He had a big deal with them. But I think the reason, because my dad wouldn't have done anything particularly generous for the sake of it.
Yeah.
I think the reason he gave or sold the capabilities for making these 6-cylinder engines back to William Lyons of Jaguar, basically so he could get him off his back, so he could continue with his contracts with other companies. I think the contract was too restrictive.
Yeah.
That's what I think. And then he realized it was the biggest mistake he made, obviously, But and Jaguar did very well. And then from then on, there was this rivalry between my dad and William Lyons.
And presumably we get to a situation where that was the engine that was modified into the Jaguar XK range.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it was a very important engine as far as Jaguar were concerned, no doubt.
It was. Fantastic. Yeah. Definitely.
Now, I've got to talk about your mother, Joan Linton. He married
Alicia.
her. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
what year did he marry her?
1943.
Right. Okay.
So that was in the war.
Yeah. Could they have gone skiing together, perhaps?
Well, they did go skiing when I was born, actually,
Right.
which was in 1949. They left me in an incubator,
Yeah.
6 weeks premature and cesarean, and went off skiing to Switzerland, which I think is charming. I never forgave my mum for that. But they went, no, well, the only photographs I've got of them skiing was in 1946. Their honeymoon was up at Mallory Moor, which was the boathouse, which was built by the Standard Motor Company in 1938 and is still there with all the Art Deco fittings, the original bath and kitchen. And my parents had their honeymoon there in 1943. So my dad had been going up to Wales since the 1930s. This bungalow on stilts, which was built like a ship with a deck around it and cabins and things, was designed by the side of an estuary, not far from an airfield. And there's some intriguing stories about why he decided to build it in such a remote location, but it was mostly for his sailing passion. He loved sailing, and he had a number of yachts, which also goes in with his Playboy image. Really, he He loved sailing.
Yeah.
So he was living hard. He was working hard and playing hard. So yeah, 1943 honeymoon at Pensarn in North Wales between Harlech and Barmouth at Mallory Moor. We used to call it the bungalow. Still there in all its glory. Built on stilts because the estuary used to flood, and it's like being on board ship. Wonderful.
It's not too far from Portmeirion, is it?
Well, this is the funny coincidence about Portmeirion, because the guy who built Portmeirion's name was Clough Williams Ellis.
Yep.
And who was Clough Williams Ellis? He was my father's commander-in-chief in the 1st Tank Corps. So he was the historian. He was the official tank regiment's historian, and made a reference to my dad being a very capable officer or whatever, you know. But I wonder whether that's another connection through the First World War that might have introduced my dad to moving up to Wales.
Yes.
Because he was in Wales from early times, like the 20s, 30s, he was going up to Wales. I'm pretty certain, looking at the photographs that in Rosalind's photo album. And I wonder, there seems to be a connection with this Clough Williams Ellis guy, who actually after the war built Portmeirion. It's lovely, just not far from Portmeirion at all.
Yeah, we love Portmeirion. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I suppose we'd better sort of make the point that despite the fact that your father was going skiing and doing all sorts of things in 1943, the Standard Motor Company was involved with the shadow factories, and they built 1,066 mosquitoes.
Yes, you got your facts right.
Plus
there.
A load of other stuff. So
a load of.
Yeah. When did your father get knighted? Was that 43?
It was. That was. You see, it all happened in 1943. He was skiing in March 43. He was married in June, and in July he was knighted at Buckingham Palace.
Yeah.
And there's a lovely photograph of him in a top hat and my mum at the gates of Buckingham Palace. Wonderful photo. He was knighted. He was let's get this right. He was the chairman of the Joint Aero Engine Committee.
Right.
He basically oversaw the shadow factories in Coventry, as far as I can understand. He was the chairman of the Joint Aero Engine Committee, which was why he was knighted. The story goes that he actually approached the government in the early 30s to say, we've got mass production techniques and we could make planes if necessary. And in 1936, they got back to him and said, right, you're on. We're going to build 2 shadow factories, Aero 1, Aero 2, in Coventry. The first one was in 1936 on the Standard Company's golf course. And there's this great photograph of him with all the gang digging with a spade into the company golf course. And this company called Garlics of Coventry built the shadow factories, built a lot for Standard, and actually built half of Coventry after it was bombed in whatever year it was, 1940 or whatever. Yeah. So they were a big building company. They built the shadow factories. And then after the war, my dad approached the government and said, can I keep those factories and build tractors and vanguards? And that's what he did.
So one of them was Banner Lane.
Banner Lane, exactly.
Yeah. Now, in 1945, he made an application to the College of Arms. So you have got a family coat of arms. Is that right?
Well done. Yes, spot on. And I've got the coat of arms actually in my room just over there next door.
Yeah.
There's a big saga about that because my brothers left it, the document, in a house in Wales with a sculptor called Monty Sirota, who then separated from his wife. And when she died, their son was looking through her belongings and found this scroll. So Monty contacted me through the Standard Motor Club and said, look, I've got this College of Arms scroll, 1945, allowing your dad to have a family crest. Would you like it? Yes, we would like a contribution for it. And my brother Hugo ended up paying 350 quid to get it back. But then that was his fault for leaving it in this farmhouse in Wales.
And
I've got it, and it's a nice document. So yeah, it's not hereditary. My dad's knighthood wasn't hereditary.
Yeah.
As next of kin, because both my brothers are dead now, I would be allowed, if I wanted to, which I wouldn't, is fly a flag on top of my house with the family crest on, or even put it on the side of the car door.
Oh, you'd have to do that. You'd have to do that.
Well, fun enough, this American guy who's about 95, who found my father's Bentley, his 1952 Mark 6 Bentley, in a barn in California, where it had been for 35 or 36 years. He renovated and completely restored this Bentley, drop head coupe, and he put a representation of the family crest inside the door of this Bentley. It was sold for £350,000. This Bentley was. It was a complete masterpiece. He didn't even make any money at it. He did not make a penny on it. He spent £350,000 renovating it and restoring it.
Yeah,
1952 Bentley, and it's in England today. Fun enough, with a German industrialist engineer called Dean Kronstein, who's got dual British nationality and lives in a stately home somewhere up in Shropshire. So that Bentley's still there. That has got the family crest on the inside of the door. I haven't even got a ring. My brother Hugo's second wife, actually, or who's now his widow, she's got the last family crest. As a ring that my mother had. But yeah, there is a family crest. Yes, there is.
Interesting to note that your father worked on the basis of fair wages for staff and actually put in a pension scheme for those people on the shop floor before he did for the people working in the offices.
You've got that absolutely spot on. Amazing. He was so ahead of his time in many ways.
Yeah.
He really did care for the everyday worker at Standard. He really looked after the apprentices. He put people through driving lessons and driving tests. He had this pension scheme. He rewarded incentive. If people wanted to work harder, they got paid more.
Yeah.
And Standard actually was the gold standard of employment in Coventry for many years. If you could work there, the wages were higher than anybody else in Coventry. So when he was at the helm, he really got it. He got the whole place rocking, and rolling. He really did. Apart from a lot of in-house problems with directors and people who are usually fired because he felt a bit threatened by their competitive ambitions. So he used to just get on. If they didn't agree with him, he just fired them. But I mean, the actual factory was running beautifully, and they were kicking out all these cars and tractors, and everyone was happy, and everyone's earning a lot of money.
He gets his own back on William Lyons in 1945 when he acquires a virtually bankrupt Triumph Motor Company. That was his revenge, wasn't it?
I think it was. He bought it for the name. He bought the name for £75,000. Triumph had been bombed. He wanted an image. Triumph was the name, and he wanted a sports car, and the TR2 was that. And it was developed by a fellow who used to live near here, actually, in Bourne. Used to work for BRM. Ken Richardson, he's the guy that kind of developed it, who I met many years ago. But yeah, the TR2 got his own back on Lyons in a way. That was his swan song in a way before he exited the company a year later.
Yeah. The other interesting thing was that obviously there's a shortage of materials after World War II. So you had the one engine and you had three applications, namely the Standard Vanguard, the Triumph TR2, and the Ferguson tractor.
the
all
tractor,
using the same
T20.
piece of kit. Yeah.
Yeah, adapted just for them. Yeah, amazing
Yeah.
that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that tractor, the TE20, the little grey Fergie, was exported all over the world. I mean, they had people all over the world
And still
buying
work.
that.
Yeah. And they're still
Yes,
around.
yes,
Yeah. I
South
can vouch for that.
America, everywhere. There's some on Alderney, are there?
Yeah. Well, I've got
A few
one.
in the Channel Line. You've got a Fergie?
Yeah.
No, you haven't.
And just to
fabulous.
make everyone happy, Christine's got a Trump Spitfire. So
No, I
we
love the
certainly
Spitfire.
represent Coventry very well, the LeBlanc family. There's no doubt about
And
that.
you lived in Warninglid, where I was brought up. So I mean,
Yeah,
you
absolutely. Yeah,
ticked
yeah.
all
It's
the
a small
boxes.
world.
Fantastic.
Quite interesting that he actually did a deal with Harry Ferguson to utilise
Yeah.
the Banner Lane factory, and that went on
Yeah.
for quite a few years, didn't it? Production there.
Yeah, they built 500,000. That's 500,000 TE20 little grey Fergie tractors.
Yeah.
Between 1945 and about 1955. My dad left the company in 1954, and that was largely to do with the fact he did a deal with Massey Harris of Canada without telling the board of directors, and that was the final straw when they got rid of him, because he'd done a deal for them to make future variants of the Ferguson tractor, and he'd signed this deal with Massey, and in fact it was to their advantage, because Massey Ferguson, whatever, became the big company
that it is now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he wasn't doing anything wrong. He just failed to tell the directors. But and Harry Ferguson himself was a very controversial character. And a lot of the documents that I researched at the archives, at Warwick University Archives, were letters between Harry Ferguson and my dad complaining to each other. My dad didn't like to be referred to as a contractor, but more of a partner, because they were in business together. Standard did far more of the work than was expected. They had to redesign the whole thing. And there's this whole sort of rapport of complaints between Harry Ferguson and my dad. How they lasted, I don't know how they still lasted, because they fell out.
Because Ferguson sued Ford, didn't he, for God knows how many
about
millions?
6 million. It's about 6 million.
And won. Yeah.
Yes. And that's why he had a private suite at Claridge's.
Yes,
he could afford a private suite at Claridge's and drive a Ferguson tractor out from the ballroom down the steps of the hotel as a publicity stunt.
Yeah, it's a wonderful photograph, that, no doubt about that.
I know.
Now, this next bit is where our paths cross, because you're at Warninglid at the Grange. I'm at the Hollis Warninglid, and we're there at about the same time, because I was born in 46 and I stayed there till 62. You came along a bit later, as you said, but it's a small world, isn't it?
Oh, it's tremendous. I've got lovely memories of Warninglid, cycling up to the shop, the Half Moon pub. I never went in, I was too young. But I've got lovely memories of the village and the woods across where we lived. We used to spend most of our life over in those woods. Beautiful.
And
pine woods.
Those woods were Lyndhurst, weren't they? The Lyndhurst
they
estate.
were. Yes, that's right.
And
that's right.
that was owned by the father of Union, Jack Hayward.
Do you know, it was the Haywoods? It was the Haywoods. Yes. Oh my goodness. He was what? The father of the Union Jack?
No, yes, that's right. W.C. Hayward. He owned an engineering company called Firth Cleveland, but he has about 3 farms in Warninglid, and did pretty well, I think, out of it.
Oh, amazing.
Yes.
But I even met somebody who used to play cricket for Warninglid some years ago, But it's lovely. We used to have lovely bike rides, and we used to have a pony in the field and go off riding down the road, and it was just great times, really. But anyway.
Tell us a little bit about the car crash at Banner Lane, because that was a bit of a turning point for your father, wasn't it?
Yeah, and this is ironical too, because Ken Richardson, as we know, took a TR2 up to 124 miles an hour on the Jebeki Highway in Belgium on May the 20th, 1953. Well, in November the 3rd, in Banner Lane, it was Ken Richardson again driving a car that had the same engine, the TR2 engine, but this time it was in a Swallow Duretti, named after Dorothy Dean of California, who they used to sell TR2s and Durettis in California. So Ken was driving. It was a left-hand drive vehicle because everybody was horrified. They saw my dad getting into what they thought was the driving seat. There has been a little bit of a suggestion they might have been at the pub having a couple of drinks beforehand, but it hasn't been substantiated. But definitely no seatbelts. And the Swallow Duretti, where Ken drove at a considerable speed down Banner Lane, a van or a truck had pulled in that shouldn't have been there, and he braked to avoid a head-on collision, but they must have been going on impact at tremendous speed. I don't know. I mean, I put him at 40 miles an hour, but it could have been more. When you look at the photo, the whole front side where my dad's side is, which is the right-hand side, was completely crunched in. He broke his arm. It fractured in 3 places. He had serious head injuries. Ken Richardson nearly lost an eye. He had about 47 stitches around his head and eye.
Gosh.
They believed at the time that my dad was dead. His right-hand man at the time, whose name defeats me, pulled him out of the wreckage. There was even a newspaper article that was brought to him in hospital the next day saying Sir John Black dies in car crash. They thought he was dead. The driver of the van was treated for shock. And this sort of personal assistant for my father, who's written a few bits and pieces over the years, he said he actually saw the van not only twisting round, but lifting off the ground. So they hit that van pretty hard because the wheels, they left the ground. And so he was taken off to hospital. There's a photograph of him at the Welcome Hotel. I don't know where that is, somewhere locally, Kenilworth, I think. He went to the south of France for a couple of weeks recuperation. And most people believe he came back too early because his judgment was even worse impaired than it was before. And really, I think he knocked the socks out of him. It was a very serious crash. Ironically, my dad was quoted as saying the Swallow Duretti was the car that they should have designed because he preferred the design of it than the TR2. It had much more flowing lines, the Duretti. It was a beautiful vehicle. Peter Lockley's got one who's in the Standard Motor Club. He's got a Swallow Duretti. Beautiful car.
Did your parents separate at that time after the crash, or?
Yeah, I know this is awful. The timing is terrible because it was 1954 that when I was 5, that not only was he kicked out of the company, but my mum left him because of his drinking. I mean, I'm talking about adding insult to injury, that he was kicked out of the company. I mean, he did have this rather strange habit of getting his directors to sign their letters of resignation before joining the company. As a sort of insurance, like an insurance thing, which they must have thought was strange, but they all did.
But they came back to bite him.
It did, exactly, because he used to go to a company do, often back from holiday, and he used to say, "There's too many directors here. Could you bring me the letters of resignation?" And he used to sack a couple of them just on the spot. And this sort of off with your head policy really got him, like you say, came back to bite him. And the whole board of directors arrived at this house in Longfield, called Longfield, in a Babon Hall, where he used to stay. It was a house he rented to be nearer the works. And his butler, Tom Thorne, said, "Sir John, it's the board of directors of the Standard Motor Company to see you." He said, "Well, you better let them in." And in walks Alec Dick with this letter. I mean, he was the guy that kind of instituted it, and with all his directors. And they said, "Could you sign this, please?" And he signed it reluctantly after a bit of sort of protesting. And then for some reason, the next day, he asked them to bring the letter back because he wasn't happy with the signature. He wanted to re-sign it, which is strange. And then he went off to Wales. He went off to Wales and got drunk, which is what he did on most occasions, including the day I was born. He went up to North Wales and got drunk. And then my mum negotiated with the Standard Motor Company, said, "Come on, look, he's done so much for you. Don't you think he deserves some kind of pension?" So they gave him £30,000, which may have been as well as £5,000 a year as a sort of pension till the end of his life. The use of the company bungalow in Wales and a Bentley, but not the one that was restored in America, I don't think. And a Mayflower, and a Triumph Mayflower. He's allowed to keep that as well.
And that was it, love of his life, wasn't it, that car?
He loved it. And they always say it had a very tall roof because he had a very long back.
Yeah.
And he designed that car as a family car with himself and family sort of in mind. So it was designed for his long back, apparently. My mother named it after the flower, not by the ship, although it was used as publicity, the Mayflower, for the American market.
And
a lot of the other names of cars like Renown did significant in, and Vanguard did have to happen to do with ships. But my mother always maintained she ran a flower farm in Warningly Grange after my parents separated, and she always said she named the Mayflower after the flower, which is a wildflower that's in the hedgerows now, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, 1954, that's when it all went wrong. Standard. Out. My mum left him and that was it. He went up to Wales and that was it.
But they never divorced.
No, they only separated. And about 6 months before he died, I think it was, that he had his bags packed. He was going to visit her in a house in Switzerland. And then he chickened out. The farmer, Morris Evans, who's still alive today, age 90, remembers he was going to take him to the airport. And my father said, I can't go through with this. He phoned up my mum and said, it'll be too damaging to our separate worlds.
Yeah.
To which I say, well, their separate worlds were very similar because they both ended up on a hillside and a house with a river at the bottom of the garden and a mountain behind them. Just happened she was in Switzerland, but they like the same things, a bit of tranquility,
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I suppose it's just a matter of income tax as far as the Swiss were concerned.
That was why she went out there.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Why she moved out there. Yeah, she did.
So,
she was very clever with property as well.
1965, same year as Churchill, he dies of a stroke, age 70.
Yeah.
And
yes,
that more or less concluded it. But I dug out a bit of information, as you know, and that was the fact that in 2017 he was inducted into the British Sports Car Hall of Fame.
Never knew that.
I thought that was a rather nice, image.
Nice gesture.
Yeah, a nice gesture.
I didn't know that at all.
Yeah.
Amazing. And when you say the sports car, I presume that was the TR2, was it?
Yeah, I guess that was the.
Because of course the TR3 came afterwards, came later, and the Spire, but it must have been the TR2.
Must have
that's
been.
A lovely touch.
Yeah. So it's a really nice way of having a memorial there for your father. But there we are.
And where is that? Where would that be?
It's in Coventry, I think, but I'll send you a link.
Thank you.
So that you can see where I got it from.
Yeah.
But so there we are. Very interesting life, full of ups and downs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sadness here and there, and good times, bad times. But not many people like your father around anymore, are there?
No, I think he was a bit of a one-off. His nephew, Peter Black, who was a journalist with the Daily Mail, had his own column. He said he was a complete one-off. The rest of the family were bone idle, completely, real wastrels, really. And he said he was so driven and dynamic and motivated, And he said there was no one in the family like him. Yeah. Whether it was the shot from the First World War, I don't know. Whether that affected him mentally, it must have done.
Yeah, I guess
he was gassed at Ypres. I mean, he went to Ypres, for goodness sake, in 1918 or something. He was gassed in the Third Battle of Ypres, and he was captured by the Germans and escaped from a prison camp, which was not very heavily guarded. So he had a pretty traumatic time early on in life. I mean, we used to love going and visit him up in Wales in his farmhouse, where he ended up, Dolbebin Farm. And I was sent the auction catalogue the other day from 1967 of all his belongings, including his hunting horns and fishing rods. He's got the whole list of everything that was auctioned.
Wow.
1967.
Yeah.
There's not people like that today, but he was, I suppose, in modern standards, very dictatorial in the way that he ran the ship, as it were, of standard. But I think you either respected him or you just, absolutely deplored him because he was, so autocratic. And I think that they were in despair, his fellow directors. You know, he had Captain Black on his office, but if anybody else had, you know, Sergeant this or Major that, he made them take it down
Rip
on
it
their
down.
office door. You know, he was the only one.
Yeah,
He was the
yeah,
only captain
yeah,
of his ship. He didn't allow any rebels, any mutineers. He wouldn't tolerate any mutineers.
We take no prisoners.
We take no prisoners. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I'm 72. He was 70 when he died.
Yeah.
So, but he packed in an awful lot in his time. He really did. And he loved sport. He just loved sport. But then he was an alcoholic. So it was ridiculous that he drank to excess.
Yeah.
And people that knew him, I mean, Walter Amsterdam, who he used to go skiing with and used to stay in his chalet in Muren, he used to see his daughter I was in touch with, and she said he couldn't work out why such a talented person like my dad was actually controlled by alcohol. You know, his whole life was controlled by alcohol. And yet he was so talented, he was so clever in abilities to organize things and get things done. But yes, it's an era that's kind of lost, gone.
Yeah.
But it is well capsulated in that BBC Four episode, Classic British Cars made in Coventry. People can get on iPlayer. It was so well documented about my dad.
It's a good view. It's a good view.
Very, Nick, I thought so.
Nick, thanks so much for sparing me some time. I've
My
really
pleasure,
enjoyed talking to you about it and reminiscing about Warninglid and places like that.
Yes.
So we must keep in touch. Thank you.
Yes, do so. Very much enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you can edit it. I hope you can edit it.